talking that, and we bagged that one, and then we turned around and we got this lion over here on this wall.
That's pretty cool, man.
I think there's a bear back there. Yeah. Anyways.
Well, like I always say, we like to be happy warriors, but happy warriors nonetheless. Well, this first story we're going to get into, Ted, really, I don't think has been getting the attention it deserves. And it concerns the Iran getting the nuclear bomb. And, of course, the president had an envoy over there this weekend starting on Saturday, met in Oman with representatives of Iran. And this was really the first time in a long, long time, going back several presidents, that we've had actually direct talks with Iran. So I'm going to use a Breitbart story as a template, but I really believe that this story needs more attention. The White House said special envoy to the Middle East, Steve Witkoff, had a very positive and constructive talks with Iran on Saturday. And, they are very close. There's debates about how close, but it could be weeks, months, but certainly if they wanted to, within inside of a year, or probably much less, Iran could have a nuclear bomb. Not just nuclear capability, but the actual bomb. And that's pretty scary, isn't it, Ted?
It's real scary. And we dealt with this when I was on the Foreign Affairs Committee in Congress. Back then, John Kerry was unfortunately our Secretary of State, and we had him into the hearings, and they were talking about Iran had enough visible material to create at least one bomb, if not several dirty bombs. And that would have been back in 2014, 15, 16, somewhere in there. And that's when the JCPOA came out. And the JCPOA is the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action it would allow Iran to have enough nuclear material in a 10-year period of time. So they were going to get one. And I want to bring this up, and I want the listeners, the audience, to kind of chime in on this and give us your opinion, because we can pass this on and do editorials, and we'll get to the people that need to know. Is it the role of the United States government to dictate to another country of what they can and can't do? Or should we have the stance that go ahead and get a nuclear weapon, but you better be careful where you point it. If we feel threatened, that's the end of the story. And then all the things that go with it, the expense of going with that, and that's why Ukraine gave up their nuclear weapons when Russia broke apart. The maintenance cost was going to be over $5 billion over a period of time, and they didn't have the money. And so this is what's going to happen. And going back to the story, it's an existential threat for Israel. But we've seen this too with North Korea. They kept saying death to America. We're going to, we're the evil empire, us, South Korea, and Japan. And they've got nuclear weapons. They have chosen not to use those. Overall, it makes the world a less safe place, and more people have that. And then I know you're going to bring this up if you briefly touched on it. These are supposed to be direct talks. We're going through an intermediary in Oman. And then, as you brought up, this will cause a nuclear arms race in the Middle East with Saudi Arabia, Qatar, Oman, all these other countries. And it's just makes a bad situation worse. And I don't know how you deal with this other than with a strong hand, And it goes back to Theodore Roosevelt, peace through strength, and Ronald Reagan. And Roosevelt was walk softly, carry a big stick.
Yeah, well, as I said at the top, this story is not getting the attention it deserves, which is why we're doing it. But you mentioned about Ukraine and all, and of course, there's lots of news coming out of there. And whenever it's interesting that, and kind of weird that whenever you talk about Russia at all, if you're not 100% just, okay, they're the evil empire and must be destroyed, that somehow you're pro-Putin, which is ridiculous in its face. But the thing that's really different about the two situations is, yes, do I believe that Russia and Putin would like to dominate the world? Absolutely. But one of the things that has kept nuclear powers at bay is that whole MAD, mutual assured destruction. And I think that does work with Russia. I do not think that would work with Iran, because their belief is such that they believe that if the whole world is destroyed, that's not necessarily a bad thing for them, because they're going to get the 72 or 74 virgins and whatever and rise to, the top of heaven, so to speak. So I think they look at that MAD situation as an acceptable risk, whereas I don't believe Russia does. And that's just my opinion, but I think it's based on fact. What are your thoughts on that, Ted?
No, I think you're absolutely right. And it goes down to the religious beliefs. If you look at us in Christianity, for the people that have subscribed to Christianity, it's a peaceful religion. And I know you'll hear that about the Muslim religion. But if you go to the Quran, and you listen to the teachings, those that aren't believers should be enslaved, or they should be converted, or they should be eliminated. And so they can't coexist. You can't have Sharia law working with U.S. constitutional law. And this goes back to, if you're coming into this country, you need to assimilate. So you take that on the world stage. You take that with Iran getting a nuclear weapon, with the Ayatollahs that are hell-bent on destroying America, death to America. You see the chance, we've seen it for 45 years, to put a nuclear bomb in their hands, or even a dirty bomb, which would be as devastating in some respects. It's not a healthy situation, and this is where diplomacy really needs to take off. They had a green revolution there under the Biden years, and it was about 45% of the people in Iran were working to overthrow the government, and Biden stood back and did nothing. And this same thing happened under Obama. We did not participate in that at all. And that doesn't mean to have boots on the ground, but you can give support to the people that are doing these uprisings, because it's an internal change within their country. It's like the freedom fighters back when the Revolutionary War started here, the Patriots. And, we need to hope those things have more influence and they take over and change the conditions on the ground. Putin, he does have a role or goal of wanting to take over the world and recreate Mother Russia. And China is helping him a little bit, but he'd be a fool to think that China, if he takes over the world, China is going to be their best friend, because China's goal is to do the same thing. So they'll be at constant odds. And so the best thing is diplomacy. And that's where I just feel foreign affairs and foreign diplomacy are so vital, because we can head off a lot of this stuff if done properly. And I think the tariffs is what Trump is doing is a big step in this, and in his strong hand. He's got strong rhetoric. Now it's, unfortunately, you're going to have to back it up, because somebody's going to challenge it.
Absolutely. Well, the White House issued a statement that I find pretty interesting. It says these issues are we're talking about the Iran nuclear talks, if you're just tuning in. These issues are very complicated, and Special Envoy Witkoff's direct communication today was a step forward in achieving mutually beneficial outcome. The sides agreed to meet again next Saturday. And the statement that it's very complicated, I put in my notes here that I feel like it's yes and no. I mean, obviously, nuclear is very complicated in one aspect, and how you prevent Iran from actually either dissuade them from doing it or prevent them from doing it. But the bottom line in this, and we'll say this again, I'm sure later, but is that Iran cannot be allowed to have a nuclear weapon. I understand what you were saying, Ted, about, how that works, but I don't think Iran is looking at long term. I think they're very short term oriented, and I believe they would pay about any price to have a nuclear weapon, because they see it as a weapon of jihad. But it's really, to me, kind of cut and dried. And I'll get into why I think this in a moment. But I really believe that they just cannot simply be allowed to have one. And what are your thoughts on that, Ted?
I understand where you're coming from, but then again, you're dictating to another nation, and I don't want them to have a nuclear weapon. Understand that. Nuclear weapons are one of those things that were created. You wish they didn't. President Eisenhower said an overt, out in the open nuclear program is for peaceful purposes. When it's covert, it's for destructive purposes. And, you can go back to our Manhattan project that was very covert and it did a lot of destruction. But then you look at all the benefits that came out of the nuclear research back then, nuclear energy and things like that. It is dicey. I think the best thing that we could hope for would be a regime change in Iran that is organically grown in Iran by the Iranian people. And then a new leadership emerges that want to become responsible nations and citizens of I don't want to say the world because I don't want to be a globalist. I don't want to be a one world, but responsible citizens of Iran and focus on your country, focus on education, healthcare, research and development, those things. And that's, when you get into these matches against, personalities or ideologies, it's very destructive, and we've got to get beyond that. And I think, if you look at any war that's ever gone on, the aftermath has been trade. I hear where you're coming from. I would rather them not. When I was in Israel, we were in Tel Aviv on top of some high rises there. And if Iran were to hit them with a nuclear weapon or anybody, it's an existential threat. I mean, I forget what population that was. I think there was 23 million people or 6 million people there. It would virtually wipe out over 70, 80% of their population right in on top of that building, looking around in a 360-degree view. And so it is an existential threat. And yeah, I would be very worried about that. But you would think the other nations of the world, your Saudi Arabias and these other nations would be just as concerned about that and putting more pressure on Iran. And that would be economic pressure and things like that. It's a tough situation. And this is where we need to, support the people that are over there negotiating and hope that they have a strong hand and that they can have convincing meetings. And I think with the way Trump's left this open, they need to come to the table. They need not to get a weapon or there'll be consequences. So are we prepared to do that? And if that happens, does that start another war, or is that a distraction in another Middle East conflict while Russia does what they do? And then you got Xi Jinping doing what he's wanting to do. And his goal is to weaken us and so he can move and go to his dominance around the world.
Yeah, well, you mentioned the countries in the region there, and I think that they are definitely on the side. I wouldn't say our side, but they're on the side of Iran not getting a nuclear weapon. But the problem, when you mention like Saudi Arabia, obviously they're a very wealthy nation. They've been a reasonably decent ally of ours in the past and now, and it seems like President Trump has a good relationship with them. But I think the key difference is that they are still a monarchy, and the only real actual democracy you have in the whole area is Israel. And so I say that because, one, I don't think Saudi Arabia's military is all that great. They've proven not to be in the past. Pretty good at supporting, not too good at offensive. The other side is they're worried about their own population. That Sure. If they get out of line a little bit, their hold on power in places like Egypt, for maybe different reasons, but in places like Saudi Arabia and other parts of the Middle East is kind of tenuous, really. It's fragile, their hold on their population.
Well, it is. And as you brought up, they're a monarchy, and somebody needs to correct me because I'm going to speak on just what I think I know. I think their population is about 5 million people, and half of those are not Saudis. They're immigrants, they're people working in there. And the monarchy, the Saudis, are in a very elite group of people, very wealthy, like you said. And they're not big enough, really, to be a formidable armed service force, although they have our F-35s. But when it comes down to this, and this goes back to Obama's book, Hopes and Dreams of My Father, that book, when he said, if there is a conflict that breaks out, between the Muslims and the Christians, I have to side with my Muslim brothers. Now, you take that on a world stage. Are you going to have Arabs fighting against other Arabs, which they do all the time? But when it becomes that versus Western democracies or liberal democracies, who are they going to side with? And so this is something, again, we want to avoid this at all costs, but sometimes you have to do some tough things to send a signal. And it would be better if it wasn't just America. Again, if this is going to happen, it needs to be the nations that are going to be affected by this, involved in this. And this is something that when the JCPOA was negotiated by John Kerry, which is that's just a bad start right there, and others, the countries that were mostly affected by this decision were Israel, Turkey, the UAE, the Saudis, and all that. None of them were involved in this negotiation. And I would think if you showed up in force with surrounding countries and says, this is what we want you to do, and we do not want you to get this weapon, I think that would be a great way of diplomacy to bring these people to the table that are going to be affected by this.
Well, last Monday, the president held his second meeting at the White House in the Oval Office with Benjamin Netanyahu.
Right.
This is what President Trump said after that meeting. He said, we're having direct talks with Iran, and they've started on Saturday. We had a very big meeting, and we'll see what can happen. And I think everybody agrees that doing a deal would be preferable to doing the obvious. And he said, he went on to say, and the obvious is not something that I want to be involved with. This is the president now. Frankly, that Israel wants to be involved with if they can avoid it. So we're going to see if we can avoid it, but it's getting to be very dangerous territory. So my thoughts on the obvious, and I'll get you to share yours, are that most obvious is that Israel will not allow this to happen, and with or without our help. And I'll talk about some details in a minute, that they're not going to allow this to happen. Even if we say that we're not going to do anything, I still believe Israel will, and I'll expand on that in a moment. What are your thoughts about the obvious, Ted?
The obvious is, they're talking about going in there and destroying all their nuclear capabilities, all their military, take down their no-fly zones, which coordinates and allows their military jets to fly and all that. And so their goal is to wipe all that out and to bring the regime to their knees. The thing they have, and I know they know this, but for the listeners, the Iranian people, for the most part, don't like the Ayatollahs. They don't like the regime. They don't like, and they want to get rid of them. And again, this is where Biden had an opportunity with the Green Revolution that was going on there. And same thing under Obama. But they didn't help. And, going back in election interference, and this is a little off topic, other countries interfere in ours. We interfere in other countries. Obama, when Netanyahu was running, he sent money through these NGOs to go and get him unelected. He fought against Netanyahu. There was no love lost there. And just kind of shows you his ideologies. Instead of working on world peace, he's working to divide another nation and weaken it. So I say all that to come back to strong, effective foreign policy with no nuances. You need to have the big stick and just say this. This is the thing. I have some great professors. If you do this, this will happen. If you do this, this will happen. It's your choice. We're not going to make that decision. And that's why I was saying, if you want to get a nuclear weapon, you go get it, but you're responsible for it. And if we think these things are going to happen, this is what our response will be. So you choose. I'm not telling you what you can or can't do. It's just, I'm going to tell you what we're going to do if we feel threatened.
Absolutely. Well, this story is so important that we're going to take a commercial break and come back and pick up where we left off. So,
let's follow it week by week.
Absolutely. So we're gonna talk a little bit more about it after the break. But right now, we're going to take a commercial break. Please look at our sponsors, support our sponsors. And if you'd like to become one, look at the tagline you'll see that says Contact Freddie. We'll be right back.
Although the owner of Lewis Oil Company maintains she is 29, Lewis Oil turns 60 years old in June. Chevron would like to recognize the North Florida second-generation family-owned business, celebrating its growth and staying power. Lewis Oil Company maintains significant on-hand supplies, strategically located fuel depots, a delivery fleet, on-site service, fuel card locks, and convenience stores. Lewis Oil Company understands its responsibility in the local economy by providing service and delivery on demand and in crisis. As a first responder for 18 Florida counties and the Southeast from Texas to Virginia, we are proud of this rare accomplishment. Lewis Oil delivers.
This is Ward Scott, and I want to thank all our sponsors who keep the show going and pay the bills. The Ward Scott Files premium sponsors are Crime Prevention Security Systems, large enough to serve you, small enough to care.
Meldon Law, the only official injury partner of the Florida Gators.
The Ward Scott Files Gold sponsors are Lewis Oil Company,
Shoot GTR,
On the Spot Dry Cleaners, R&R Construction, and Style Cuts. If you are interested in promoting your business on the show, you can visit our website, www.wardscottfiles.com, and click on the Advertise Here banner on the right side of the page, or call my friend Freddie at 352-284-3733. Again, thank you to all the great businesses that support the Ward Scott Files. And remember, if you like the show, thank our sponsors and support the businesses that support us.
What you just said is one of the most insanely idiotic things I have ever heard. Everyone in this room is now dumber for having listened to it. May God have mercy on your soul.
Ward, that very much surprises me that you've never been tased.
You can't handle the truth.
All bees poop.
A warthog. He's going to come up the steps. Here he comes. Oh my goodness, and he's huge. Hello, boy. I wonder if we can pet him. Hi, boy.
Can we touch him? No, don't.
Help me! Help! Help!
And we're back. And if you're just tuning in, you're welcome, first of all, to our Pirate Podcast, hosted by yours truly, John Martin, the old salty dog, and my captain of our pirate ship, former Congressman Ted Yoho, who is coming in remote today. But we're talking about
it's the reincarnation of the Ward Scott Files that is going to be the WSF Files.
Absolutely, absolutely. So we were talking about the nuclear talks that are now going on between envoys from the United States of America and Iran in Oman. And we're going to pick up kind of where we left off. That President Trump said about these talks. He said, if I think the talks aren't successful with Iran, I think Iran is going to be in great danger. And he went on to say, and I hate to say it, great danger, because they can't have a nuclear weapon. They can't have a nuclear. This is the president of the United States, and we know Benjamin Netanyahu would echo that as well. So what do you believe is at stake here, Ted?
Well, I think destabilization of the area. Some people say, well, it'll stabilize it. You got to keep in mind, Turkey's over there. Turkey's 100% Muslim. And they have the largest army in Europe. The Turks do. Who are they going to side with? They have not sided with us in NATO on several occasions or in the UN. So is this going to rattle the wrong feathers in Turkey? And are they going to become an adversary? And keep in mind, they have our technology on the F-35s. And, this is very dangerous. And I can't believe one of the things that got me involved in foreign policy back in the 70s was Iran, when we had the oil embargo. And here we are, 40 years? That was 1970. So we're looking at 50 years. There's still a problem. And they look at us just as evil as we sometimes look at them. And I think what Trump is saying, he's drawing an ultimatum. It's a line in the sand. And that's a very dangerous thing, because you can draw it kind of like Obama did with chemical weapons in Syria. If he uses that again, if Assad uses that again, it's a red line. Of course, Assad used that and we didn't do anything. So it showed us to be a paper tiger. And Trump to do this and say there'll be very serious consequences, that's a threat. And you better be willing to back that up. If not, you just jeopardize peace that much more, I think, and embolden that person that you said you're going to not allow them to do it. It's kind of like your kids raising your kids. Don't do that again. You're going to be sorry if you do that again. And if you're not willing to act, sometimes those things aren't best to say in the open.
Yeah,
that's my opinion. But I'd like to hear from listeners what they're thinking.
Yeah, absolutely. Chime in on wherever you're seeing this podcast. We're on every day. I mean, not every day. Every Monday, live 9 to
every
10.
Monday and Friday.
Every Monday and Friday. And if you'll chime in on the Facebook and wherever you're watching it, we will respond to it. So we definitely appreciate that. But I personally believe, Ted, that we're kind of, when I say we, I'm talking about the Middle East, is at an inflection point. And the way I look at it, two outcomes of this. One is, and people may laugh or go, there's no way when I say this, I believe we actually are potentially on the verge of a lasting peace over there. Because if we can prevent Iran from getting a nuclear weapon, either by force or by choice, and eventually they're going to run out of gas, as you're talking about with their people, definitely want freedom. And, places like Saudi Arabia, we could see they're building some kind of new mega center over there. You look at the Arab Emirates and all that area, they want commerce, that type of thing. Egypt is hard to put a direct thing on, but I believe that the Middle East would be prepared for peace. And who could we have better to lead that than Donald Trump? But on the flip side of that, and we've kind of alluded to it before, that if Iran actually gets a nuclear weapon, a functional nuclear weapon, first of all, there's the obvious that it could be potentially used against Israel. That's the most obvious. But beyond that, there's no way in the world that places like Saudi Arabia, places like Egypt, many others are not going to immediately go into the nuclear business as well. They're going to get a nuclear weapon if that happens, and there'd be very little we could probably do to stop that. And then we'd have a hotbed of nuclear capability that is probably more threatening than anything on the planet right now.
Sure. And that area has been destabilized pretty much all my life, probably since the days of Jesus Christ. And you're right. If this is done correctly, the whole narrative over there could change to where, it lives in peace, the true peace that they've been saying they've wanted for all these years. But if they do get, and they've already got enough material to do a dirty bomb. You don't need to have a ballistic missile and an ICBM to come across, intercontinental ballistic missile, to hit America. You could bring a freighter up and park it offside of New York or San Francisco and detonate it. You could take a suitcase bomb and detonate it within a city, put it in a small aircraft and fly over a city and put biologicals in there too. There's all kinds of bad things that can happen. And the negotiations, I think, are the best thing to do. And then go back to sanctions, but the sanctions need to be not just America. We use sanctions around the world flippantly sometimes, and they become ineffective. If we can get other nations to use sanctions and not cheat on them, as we've caught them over and over again, shipping unregistered tankers full of oil that are coming out of Iran or going into North Korea, bringing supplies out of Cuba and vice versa. When you got people that aren't all on the same page, you get this nonsense that's going on and puts everybody in jeopardy. The best thing, as you mentioned, and I agree with you, that if these are done properly and effectively, that you could get to a point of lasting peace. And wouldn't that be great for the next generations?
It absolutely would. And, but I want to tell people, and I'm giving you my opinionated, as I say, facts, but I do have some sources in Israel, and I let them remain anonymous, that have been right every single time they've told me this. Here's the bottom line. The bottom line is Israel is not going to allow Iran to get a nuclear bomb. They're just not going to do it.
This is true. They can't afford it. No, you're right.
They're simply not. And let me just tell you, my sources tell me, and I gotta believe they're right, that Israel feels so strong about this that they're going to strike with or without our help. They already, if Kamala had won the election, God help us, but if Kamala had actually won the election, Israel would have probably struck already, because they're not going to allow this to happen. And the big difference is in capabilities. And this, I'm not sharing any government secrets here. This is a widely known secret. Most people believe that Israel has nuclear capability now. And I believe that they do personally. And there's a couple of examples. One, a lot of people don't even know this, but Israel has 3 nuclear capability subs. They absolutely did. It's known. They were built in Germany. They have that capability. Why would you build them if you don't want to use them? And they also have the Jericho missile that has nuclear capability. The one thing they don't have is basically like our stealth big bombers that can bomb from 50,000 feet. They don't have that. And that would be required to take out that mountain facility that Iran has. And I'm not advocating this. I'm just telling you what I believe is true. And but they do have a nuclear capability, at least it's thought they did, to take that, which would be a terrible thing to fire off a nuclear weapon. So I believe that if these talks don't provide proof, fruition or whatever, that we're going to join them, that Donald Trump will join them, and that facility will be taken out, those facilities one way or another. Because my sources tell me that Iran is not years away. They literally have the capability of making between a half a dozen and a dozen nuclear. Their fusion material is already done, and that they could produce one within a matter of months if they really wanted to. And I just don't see how Israel's going to allow that to happen. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Well, they can. And you're right. They will not allow this to happen, and they'll go alone if they have to. Of course, if they go alone, that brings us in automatically. But, even during the JCPOA, the agreement that was terrible that Obama and Biden or Kerry did, they were still enriching uranium. It was such a joke. One of the agreements were that the IAEA, the International Atomic Energy Agency, could go anywhere and inspect their nuclear enriching process. But that wasn't really true. It was where they could go anywhere that the Iranians said they could go, and there were several secret sites they weren't allowed to go in. It was a joke, but it looked good on paper. It looked like Obama had accomplished something along with Kerry. And you're right. They will not allow, they being Israel, will not allow Iran to have that. And let's just hope the strong rhetoric in these negotiations pay off. But that's over there. There's something on this side I'd sure like to talk about too.
Yeah.
That's those, if you want to go into that.
Yeah, absolutely. What Ted's talking about is some of his favorite people, Bernie Sanders, Ocasio-Cortez, and now others are joining in on this. And so we're going to get into that, Ted. I think you're right on cue there. One of my goals, and I think we've adopted it kind of as a goal of the show, is to educate, motivate, and activate people. Because I always tell you that it's up to us, the American people, how this story turns out. I'm talking about the story of America, which is still being written. And I know you believe that same thing. But you know who else, Ted, is doing that? There's educating people, motivating people, and activating people. And you know who it is. It's Bernie Sanders and AOC and the squad and all of that. They are absolutely educating, motivating, and activating people.
They sure are. And for the listeners, if you haven't tuned into any of this, because I know there's an aversion, if you're like me, I don't want to even see those people. But they are moving in mass around the country. Bernie's in his 80s, and how anybody would follow his socialist ideals in America, just it befuddles me. And then, but when you look at the people showing up, this one John's got some video of, this is in Los Angeles. So it's estimated to be between 30 and 40,000. They were in Las Vegas last night, and I think there's over 60,000 people. And listen to the message. Listen to the way they're ginning up the people, saying how America only works for the rich people. America is controlled by oligarchs, under the Trump regime, and how they're destroying democracy. Everything they're saying is what they used to get as far as they did with Obama, Biden, and Harris. And, it's psyops is what it is. And it's goes back to Joseph Goebbels under Hitler. You tell a lie long enough, people will believe it. And they're just fomenting lies. They're fomenting hatred. And that in itself didn't bother me. But when I see these crowds that are drawing, and the enthusiasm in that crowd, that's the enthusiasm that brought Donald Trump in. They're doing that. And what are we doing on the conservative side? And this is where I think that, John talks and we talk about educate, motivate, and activate. This is where we as conservatives need to start having rallies, and we need to build to counter this, because one side's going to win. You're going to go back to the Biden-Harris socialist, communist ideologies, or you're going to work to fight the constitutional republic. And as Reagan said, it's only one generation away. Look at the new generation of Democrat leaders coming up, or progressive leaders, I'll say. And this is something it's a wake-up call for everybody.
Well, you're absolutely right, Ted. And, if people don't, when I say Bernie, I'm not saying Bernie is going to run for president, be the next president.
No, absolutely not.
That's not what I'm concerned about. But the ideology that he's pushing, and at 80 years old, I have to give the man some credit. He is very good at what he does. I can give kudos and admiration to a certain extent on one side for capability, but Bernie is no Joe Biden. He is no Joe Biden. Bernie is very capable. He's pretty good at the message. I don't like the message, but he's good at delivering it. And if you don't think that his ideology could win, just look at the two facts I'd like to put out there. One is that the reason why Joe Biden won is because the Democratic Party the upper echelon was terrified of Bernie Sanders would win, because they felt like it would damage the party and they wouldn't be able to carry elections. So Joe Biden came in.
Not only that, but they couldn't control Bernie like they could Biden.
Yeah, absolutely. And like I've said before, and that we're finding out more and more now that Joe Biden was never the functioning, and I want to say functioning president of the United States. I'm not even talking about election. I'm talking about the man was not capable of day-to-day running the affairs, so someone else was doing it.
No, he was Obama's third term.
On the flip side of what you were just saying about Bernie and all, but look where the Democrat Party is now. And what they actually did when they had the power, they moved even further to the left. And I would say that the Democratic Party I don't think they've been any more left since the Vietnam War. And they actually are better at it now than they used to be, which makes what Bernie is saying and Ocasio-Cortez and some of the younger ones even more dangerous, I think.
No, it really does. And, the 60s, I was there. I was young, ignorant, but it was just a different flair in this country. What you see now is it's a whole movement. It's 100% anti-American, what they're saying and what they're spewing. The reason you don't have health care and you can't afford health care is because of the oligarchs and Trump and all of his cronies up there. No, it's not. As you and I have talked, we came from nothing. My wife and I came from nothing. We had nothing. We had a good work ethic that our parents instilled in us. And we showed up and we worked hard. We got a good education. You don't need a good education in a college. Trades pay pretty darn well. And it's just wanting to do better for you and your family, want a better life for you, and not blaming somebody else. If you listen to these clips, they're blaming other people for your failure of success. And I just don't buy that. That's just not American. America was built on hard work and, and opportunity. And that's what a constitutional republic provides. That's not what they're providing on their side. They're saying their side or our side is taking away your rights. The conservative side is working to preserve your rights. And, they're talking about how they're taking people in the middle of the night. Well, they might be, but they're the illegals that are here that Trump said he was going to do that. And this is very dangerous. This is just a preview of what it's going to build up. This is just the beginning, how it's going to build up to the midterms. You're going to see the rise of Antifa again. And, I'm going to turn it over to you, John, because I know you had some stuff you wanted to do.
Well, it's interesting, and I know this will probably shock you as some of our listeners when I say this, but Bernie Sanders, you talk about blaming other people and you can't get there, and the American dream. Bernie Sanders is an example of where you can get to with the American dream. Love him, hate him, or whatever. I mean, I saw him last night on a live stream because one of the services, Ted, I do is I watch things so you don't have to. But I was watching Bernie live streaming last night with one of his oligarchy rallies out of Salt Lake City, Utah, which, is kind of interesting in and of itself. But there was over 60,000 people watching that live just on the stream that I was watching. And Bernie was talking about, how he came basically from nothing, a working family and all of that. And all of that's pretty well true. But the Bernie Sanders of today is a very wealthy person and tremendously successful, has everything you could possibly want, except maybe being president, thank God. But Bernie Sanders is an example of what's possible in America.
Well, he is. And he talks about the oligarchy and Trump and the rich and how they're all up in the White House. Keep in mind who George Soros is. He's a billionaire. Who is Sam Bankman-Fried? He was a billionaire that got his money out of fraud, that donated heavily, the heaviest Democratic donor.
$40 million, I believe.
Yeah, it might have been more than that. And you look at Zuckerberg and you look at Bezos, all these people that they're saying, they're blaming us for being in bed with the oligarchs. They were doing the same thing, but they lost. And so now they've got to find somebody to blame for their loss. It was their policies that lost. It was their candidates that lost. AOC is different than Harris. I'm not going to say any more other than she is very articulate, very charismatic. Harris wasn't. Her argument, they're not truthful. They're hateful. They're divisive. And you listen to her, she's talking about racism and the whole reason that you're not you can't get ahead in America is because of the inbred racism in here. And there's a term, I think we all know what misogyny is. It's white people, not older white men treating women bad. There's another word called misandry, and it's the hatred for white people and especially the patriarch. She is a perfect example of that. And listen to what she spews. It's dangerous. And Bernie's just out there. He's against capitalism. He's more for socialism. Obviously, he's a socialist. But it goes beyond that. And then you tie him up with somebody like AOC and that Maxwell Frost. They're hardcore socialists, if not communists, Marxists. And that's
go ahead.
We had an example of where our country was with Biden and Harris. And thank God Trump won and the conservative movement won this time. What's going to come next time?
Yeah,
and if it goes back the other way next time, that's that pendulum swinging rapidly further and further. And it goes back to what Ray Dalio said and other people said, that we're heading for a civil war in our country. This stuff has got to stop. We've got to come together as Americans and on American values, not a progressive value, not a democratic value, not a Republican value. They need to be American values, and we need to work together because you've got all this other stuff outside of us. You got the Middle East, you got Russia, you got China, you got all these other things that are wanting to destroy us. Let's not destroy us from within.
Absolutely. And just so people understand, you mentioned the whole billionaire class. Well, that was one of the few actual voting constituencies that Kamala actually carried, was the billionaire class. So that tells you a lot right there. But Bernie actually
at the Hollywood scene.
Yeah, absolutely.
The Hollywood scene.
Bernie did a pop-in at Coachella, which is a huge 2-week-long music festival over the weekend. And I'm just going to read you just a little snippet of what he said. He was talking to these, and this is all very young people, and they gave him just an incredible ovation. But he said, this is Bernie, you can turn away and ignore what goes on, but you do it at your own peril. He's talking to young people. He said, we need you to stand up and fight for justice. So he's calling on them to rise and stand up. Of course, earlier you mentioned the LA thing. Sanders went with AOC to his oligarch rally. There's estimated 36 to 40,000 people in LA, and it featured Neil Young and Maggie Rogers and Joan Baez. I want to play a very small snippet. You mentioned this gentleman's name, Congressman Maxwell Frost. He's actually from Florida, but he's a congressman, I believe, out of California. Is that right? I believe he is. And I just want you to hear what he's saying. Keep in mind, he's talking to about 40,000 young people and maybe 100,000 across the nation live. Check this out, and we'll come right back and talk about it.
Can we accept being stolen from by these billionaires? Well, make sure you sign up to get involved with an organization. And thank you so much for having me here today. This is such an honor. I think I might have to hop on the drum set a little bit later. We'll see. But without further ado, please give it up for a third-generation union man from La Una. Give it up for my friend Alex Aguilar.
Well, there you have it. That's a young guy, Maxwell Frost. He's certainly passionate. You know, he's got a long, I don't know about bright future, but certainly he could have a long future in politics. And he is basically inciting that crowd he's trying to do what I say, educate, motivate, and activate people. And I believe that they're being successful with that. How successful is a question, but like Bernie said in his remarks, you turn away and ignore what goes on at your own peril. And I think we could say that to our audience as well, Ted. If you turn away and ignore what's happening, and I know that's why you're so concerned, and I appreciate you bringing this forward about this movement, we turn away and ignore it at our own peril. But my question for you, Ted, is what do you think we can do about it?
Well, the worst thing to do is sit on our laurels. You know, we've got the House, the Senate, and the White House. So it's easy to sit back like we're in charge, but you can never stay in charge. You can never stay in a running stream and just stay there. You're either going upstream or going backwards. If you stay static, you're still going downstream. And so what we need to do is what I propose is I would love people to call in and volunteer and say, you know what? I want to do a rally in my town, you know, and if you'll do that, I'll bring whatever I can to do a rally. It may be just John and I to start with, but we'll reach out to, upcoming members in the Republican Party and the conservative movement and the speakers that'll talk about what made America great, what we have to do to protect our constitutional privileges here in this country and all of the amendments. And have that message that America is a country. It is a country with ideals. They're neither bad for you or good for you. It's what you make of them. But you can only succeed because of the constitutional principles that we have in this country. And if we don't protect them, you're not going to succeed in that other one, because that other one, they think there's going to be this utopia where we're all equal and we're all treated the same. You know what? God may have made us all equal in his eyes. We choose to be different, and you can only succeed in a system that allows you to advance and take advantage of opportunity. And we have that based on the constitutional principles. So to educate is listening to stuff like this, watch what's going on. To motivate is to have people get involved, and it's a pain in the rear end. There's a basketball game on, a football game, the PTA meeting, kids soccer, gymnastics, basketball, whatever it is. Life is busy, but in order to preserve it, you've got to get activated. And activated is bringing people, talking to people, and let them know what's at risk. Show them the wave that is coming for this next election. And they are out to win this. They're not playing around. When you have 30 to 40,000 people, 60,000 people showing up to see an 80-year-old socialist trying to motivate these people, not trying, he is motivating these people to get involved. And if you listen, I listened to AOC, it was terrible. But she was saying, don't just be here being present. Go to these tables around. I think they had 40 different organizations that were activist organizations, and they're going to get you to volunteer, and they're going to be the ones. It's causing this movement, and it's going to be an exponential growth. You start off with just a few people motivated, but that leads because of the enthusiasm. And when it becomes election time, it's like a rocket ship taking off. You're going to spend a lot of power in the beginning, but then once you get above gravity, it just takes off. And that's what they're doing right now. And I'm afraid that the conservative side isn't. So what we want to do is we want to motivate people and activate, and I'll help.
Well, you talk about the young people and all, and there was a day when I was young myself, but I still feel kind of young at heart. But the danger really, you think about, there is kind of a perfect storm kind of coming together that would potentially motivate all these young people. And I hope people don't misunderstand me. I'm not knocking them. I'm just talking about, like my dad used to say, you guys think y'all invented that stuff. There's just a different crowd doing it. But right. With the tariffs, one of the consequences
Sid was smart.
He was a pretty bright old fellow.
He was seasoned.
He's seasoned. But with the tariffs, one thing that is probably going to be impacted is really cheap goods from China, right? That's pretty obvious. A lot of things coming. Well, we're such a consumer society, and young people, there's a reason why advertisers target demographics from 18 to 35, because that's who's spending, that's who impulse buys the most and everything else. So if they're, yoga pants are going up, they can't buy but one pair instead of 10 pairs and all of that kind of stuff. And I'm not trivializing what they're doing. I'm just saying it's going to have an impact on young people, I think, harder than most. And that's only going to add fuel to the fire that it's rich and it's hurting them. And so I do believe, even though I don't like the message, I do believe that under the circumstances that Ocasio-Cortez and Bernie and this Maxwell Frost, their message is going to resonate pretty strong with the young people who have the time and the energy to come out to rallies.
Oh, absolutely. They're very effective. And that's the dangerous thing. They're effective and articulate, and they're appealing to the younger crowd. But listen to their message. Listen to what they are saying. Listen to the hatred they're saying. The reason there's this attack on transgenderism and all this stuff is because of the Trump and the oligarchy. No, they're the ones that brought that forward. They're the ones that brought that movement out there. People should be free to choose what they want to do, but you shouldn't be able to force that ideology on anybody, nor should the right be able to force that on somebody else. And I'll fight to protect those freedoms for people. But they're saying that all these bad things that are happening to people are because of the upper echelons of the Republican Party and the elites that want to take your rights away. And you look at what they did. We used this example before. The parents in Virginia that were at the PTA meeting, questioning the school administrators about secretly allowing their kids to be counseled on transgenderism and getting treatment for that. And these parents spoke up, and Merrick Garland, went after them and called them domestic terrorism. You look at, they're talking about how we're going after these poor innocent people, but they're not talking about how they let in 11 million people here illegally that had questionable backgrounds. And we know a lot of them were, gang members. And, you can look in the paper every day to see all these people that did bad things that shouldn't have been in this country. And they go back to George Floyd. George Floyd, those things are going to happen. It happens with white people. It happens with Latino people. But it's a breakdown of the system. If you look at the history of George Floyd, it was a terrible thing that happened. But this guy had a bad past, and he was in prison in Texas for 6 years. He got out. He shouldn't have been out. He had drug charges against him. He was high on cocaine, fentanyl, and pot. And he had just robbed a lady in Minneapolis and hit her in the head with a gang. He had like 4 or 5 people with her, and she was pregnant. And he robs her, and he's still out on the street. So it's a breakdown of the system. And that, again, goes back to what George Soros did, right, bringing in these very progressive DAs that allow these people to be back out on the street. And this is the underlying problem. You have people working against the ideologies of America because America is a stumbling block to, reduce us so that they can do this unified one world government. And some people will think that's a conspiracy, but I'm 70 years old now, and I've seen this happening. And it's going on around the world. And, we have to stand up for America. We need to stand up for our sovereignty. These people are trying to take it away.
Absolutely. Well, I love your ideas, Ted, about kind of reinvigorating a grassroots movement or creating one. And we need to fight fire with fire, so to speak.
We sure do. And that's the best way.
People. We got to
do it. And we'll do that. Our message is better. Our message encompasses everybody if they're willing to do the work. Well, I'm not blaming anybody for any of the failures I've had in life. Any of the failures I've had are me.
Well, I'm sorry, Ted, go ahead.
Well, they're saying that the reason you didn't succeed is because people like you and me or the oligarchy took their rights away, and we've kept them down because we want them to be serfs. That is such a lie, and it's so hatred-filled. I get very passionate about this because this is the kind of stuff that got me to run. Just the garbage that goes on out there. Where's the truth? We just need to work and take advantage, not take advantage, be appreciative of what we have here in America. It's unlike any other country in the world, and it's not perfect, as you and I have talked about. I'll get off my high horse, sir.
It's okay. I was thinking
I haven't decided to run for anything yet. At this
Biden
point.
moment. It's not oligarchy, it's malarkey they're pushing. But I want to read this last quote and we'll close out from Thomas Jefferson. He says, whenever the people are well informed, they can be trusted with their own government. And that's all we're really trying to do here. Have a great rest of your week, and I'll see you on Friday.
See you on Friday, buddy, from the Northern Command again. You guys take care. God bless. And let us hear your comments.
Absolutely. Peace out.
Later.